Hey there everyone, I'm Decadence, and today I'm gonna be talking about what my experience has been like as a gender critical goth / alternative / online artist and gamer, and what that has been like for me. As someone who has been into the goth subculture as well as the online art and gamer communities for a very long time now, I have definitely had quite an interesting experience what with being gender critical, because unfortunately, trans ideology has more or less totally taken over these communities. And as someone who does not believe in trans ideology at all, it has definitely made things a bit complicated for me in recent years, and I simply want to just talk about what my experience has been like with this. Now, if you're new to my channel and are curious about why I don't believe in trans ideology, I have made a full video where I explain all my views and go over every angle that I could think of in detailing why I feel the way that I do, and I'll provide a link to it for those who want to watch. Be forewarned though, that it is a pretty long video, so I suggest watching it when you have the free time. Nevertheless, I do suggest watching it before watching this video just so you understand where I'm coming from, because I will not be discussing any of that in this video here. Well, at least not the huge bulk of it anyway. With all that being said, I want to preface that all of this experience will mostly pertain to my online interactions, because that's where the bulk of my experience has come from when it comes to these communities. And the reason why I want to talk about this is simply just to reflect on things and also provide a video reference for other people within these spaces who may be gender critical as well, and to show that they aren't alone when being in these spaces while holding gender critical views. So with all that said, I don't want to waste any more time, so let's jump right into the video. To give a little background about myself, I've always been a pretty introverted and shy person who has pretty bad social anxiety and was always usually the black sheep when it came to a lot of my in real life social interactions. Especially with my peers when I was in school, as I just didn't have a lot in common with a lot of people. My interests were either too niche, too outdated, or just not all that popular. So trying to find like-minded people during those times was pretty difficult, and again, that's ignoring my horrible social anxiety and autism. So I was pretty much a loner for most of my school life. Things got even more complicated when I started dressing more alternative and androgynous in my high school years, and even more so when I started dressing more overtly feminine after high school. And considering that this was during the late 2000s and into the early 2010s, to say that I didn't face quite a bit of social adversity in my real life would be a huge lie. And because of this reality in my life, I turned to the online world to try and socialize and meet people who I had things in common with, since I wasn't really finding that in my personal life. What with my interest in the dark and macabre, and later on goth, drawing and art media, and fandoms that were tied to them, the gaming scene, and especially gay forums, as that was another aspect of my life that I really wanted to learn more about. And in those early years, it was very relieving because I eventually did meet people that I really vibed well with, and it helped me feel less alone than I was in my real life. So yeah, the online world really did help me quite a lot. Now, I'm a gay man, and I came out when I was 15 and fully when I was 16. And as far as trans ideology went, I didn't really think anything of it. It was the 2000s, and the subject of trans was not a big thing of discussion at all, like it has been in recent times. And so, because of that, I had a live and let live mentality when it came to that stuff. As long as you weren't hurting anyone else, just do you. That is, until I came across gender critical feminism that critiqued and exposed the logical fallacies as well as brought attention to the misogyny and homophobia that truly is the root of trans ideology. The late Magdalene Burns was the one who helped me hit peak trans around 2017 when I discovered her channel back in 2016 through her video on non-binary. And though I was never on board with non-binary at all to begin with, it felt cathartic to hear someone totally rip into the ridiculous concept with such intellectual wit. But I eventually stumbled upon her videos where she critiqued trans ideology, and though I was initially hesitant in watching them because of how trans rights activists created boogeymen out of quote-unquote TERFs, aka women who dare criticize trans ideology, I fought through those reservations and watched the content, and thanks to her and many other various gender critical content that I had watched and or read, I finally woke up to the reality of the trans ideology in 2017, though I kept my views to myself and gender-critical spaces. But this all came to a boiling point in 2018 when trans ideology really started to become more prominent in the mainstream, as well as taking over more online spaces. But the biggest thing that began my tipping point was the Maya Forstater case that was going on in the UK, where, long story short, a woman was fired from her job for her gender-critical beliefs that she expressed outside of her profession, where she simply said that men cannot become women. I was following the case and was pretty appalled by all the hate that she was receiving for stating a simple fact. And eventually, when world-renowned Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling joined in solidarity with her and received just as much hate, as well as the shutdown of the gender-critical subreddit for quote-unquote hate speech, I just had enough and became completely open about my gender-critical views and stance, and well, it definitely came with some social consequences as far as my involvement in some of the online spaces that I was a part of. But anyway, with that general background of myself out of the way, I'm gonna further dive into my experiences with these individual communities, where I explain a bit more in detail about what my experience has been like in the last few years, ever since I came out as gender critical, and how it has affected my being within these spaces. So as far as what my being in the goth scene has been like, I got into the scene around early 2009 when I wanted to learn about what goth was really about and what goth music actually sounded like, and I quickly learned that the scene was actually centered around the music. Unfortunately, at the time, there weren't any actual goths in my school, so I decided to turn to the internet to learn about the subculture and to also try to meet some other goths, and in time, I was able to find some mainly through goth groups on Facebook and later on the goth subreddit on Reddit. And it was thanks to these places, as well as some informative blogs, that helped me find my way into the goth subculture, and I was able to find a sense of community within the online scene. Through these spaces, I was able to meet all kinds of neat and interesting people, and though there were some road bumps here and there, I eventually felt a sense of belonging that I hadn't really experienced before in my real life. But something that I have become aware of about the goth subculture was its openness and inclusion of the quote-unquote LGBT, which as a gay man myself was nice to see, but like I mentioned earlier, I initially had no real opinion of trans ideology until about 2016 to 2017, and when I hit my peak trans moment, it definitely made things pretty awkward, but for the most part, I would mostly just ignore trans-identified people in these goth groups and keep my gender-critical views to myself and gender-critical spaces. And for a time, it was working. But like I explained earlier, things came to a breaking point for me around 2018, and I had become more open with my views, and some people within these goth spaces that I was in had caught wind of them. I eventually came out about my views to a few close friends, and I even engaged in a friendly debate about my views with one of them, where I ended up coming out on top. But unfortunately, all except one of them had steadily ghosted me out socially and eventually stopped interacting with me altogether. As far as my goth friends went, I pretty much lost all of them, and it was admittedly pretty tough to accept, especially since the one I debated with said that my views made sense after I had stumped them plenty of times with some common sense and with analytical thought. So yeah, I was pretty bummed as all this happened. And soon after, I found myself getting banned off of the 3 main goth groups on Facebook that I was in, after publicly supporting Maya Forstater and J.K. Rowling and their women's rights speech. Rumors were also being spread about me in these scenes, calling me all kinds of things and making all kinds of false accusations about me. And it was around this time where I decided that I should make a full-on video where I go over all my views in greater detail to better explain what my views and beliefs were all truly about. But during this time, while I was going over my notes and working on the video, I got a public call out on the goth subreddit and was banned from it, and the thing that truly irritated me about the situation was that they didn't even let me try to explain myself. Some of the comments were saying all kinds of ridiculous things, and just knowing that I couldn't defend myself really aggravated me. And eventually, I found myself being banned off of Reddit altogether for being quote-unquote transphobic after a discussion I had in a gay subreddit, but I'll talk more about that later. But anyway, yeah. I was pretty much permanently banned, and while I know that people have their opinions about Reddit and how socially chaotic it can be, I genuinely found Reddit to be an awesome place to interact with some like-minded people about all kinds of things that I had interest in. And getting permabanned from there did really suck, and I miss being able to talk and socialize with people on there in passing. Needless to say, a few more years go by, and after countless rewrites and reworks, I finally released my Truth About Trans video, where I go into full detail about my views and the reality of trans ideology, and after that, I was feeling a little confident to try and socialize with fellow goths and alt people again, but unfortunately, things just did not work out. Because whenever these people learned of my gender-critical beliefs, they would disengage and avoid associating with me. So, making friends within the scene felt pretty improbable and honestly, borderline impossible. And well now, here in the present at this time, I tend to just avoid socializing with goths and alternative looking people because in my experience, there's usually a 99% chance that they will be a trans rights activist, and I would just rather not deal with the inevitable fallout and being accused of something that I know I'm not. I'll admit that it's pretty depressing because once upon a time, I used to be excited whenever I would see alternative looking people, but in recent years, I'm just hesitant and admittedly avoidant of them to an extent. Don't get me wrong, I have actually come across a small handful of goths and alternative people who actually don't believe in trans ideology and have found me through my videos, but for the most part, most of the goths and alternative people that I've come across are big TRAs, and I just don't have the energy to deal with that anymore. All that being said, I will say that despite my lack of social life within these goth spaces, my likeness for goth music has not gone away at all, and I still enjoy the music very much. For the most part, when it comes to the gaming community, I'm not much of an online gamer as I prefer to game solo, and I'm also more of a retro gamer, wherein I mostly have interest in older games than I do with a lot of modern games. I'm not into first-person shooters, nor am I into MMOs and or co-op type games in general, and because of this, I don't really have to worry much about dealing with the online gaming space, which is convenient for me because in my observation, most of these people tend to be hardcore trans rights activist types. There's no denying that the trans ideology has definitely ensnared and rules over most of the online and frankly, just general gaming space, where you either have people who staunchly believe in the ideology, and or a lot of the people within the gaming space are trans-identified themselves, and because of this, I am very cautious when talking with other gamer types online, especially within specific fandoms tied to some of my favorite game series, because some of them are crawling with trans craziness. In general though, all this mostly pertains to my gaming channel here on YouTube, where I'm very cautious on socializing and or befriending people. I'd say that these days, I avoid trying to get close to people in the YouTube gaming space and just keep things pretty casual and passive. And as far as my gender critical views go within the online gaming community, the only time I'm ever vocal about them is when it comes to certain topics, like when I see people trying to transwash gender non-conforming characters, because in my eyes, that is just erasure of gender non-conforming representation, and only reinforces the ridiculous belief that if a man or woman does not conform to superficial gender stereotypes based on their sex, it means that they are some sort of trans, which is just absurd and is what has played a part in the mess that we're in now as a society. Aside from that though, to be honest, I'm not too open about my views in the gaming space as a whole, and I mainly try to keep things casual unless I feel reason to speak up. Unfortunately, like the online gaming community, the online art fandom community has also been overrun by trans ideology. In my experience and observation, it feels like every artist under the age of 35 seems to be some sort of gender identity, whether it's them being trans-identified or non-binary. And if they aren't any of these themselves, they are very loud trans rights activists. So with that in mind, I especially avoid interacting with gender-identified artists, and I take a separate the artist from the art approach, which I will admit is a bit tough, because there are some genuinely good gendy artists who I think have awesome art styles that I really like, but in the end, I know it's not worth trying to interact with them because of the conflict of views, so I simply just admire their art in passing. It's things like this that make me really miss the 2000s with how the online art world used to be like, when trans and neo-gender ideology was not really a thing, and people really connected over interests related to the fandoms that we were participating in. Because I will admit that it has been pretty lonely existing in the online art world and not really being able to connect with other artists because of the overall atmosphere of the space now brought on by the ridiculous trans ideology. I am especially very cautious and borderline avoidant in Twitter and Blue Sky's art fandom because these places seem to be the hub of trans ideology. I'm also a bit cautious on DeviantArt, which is a site that I've been on since 2006, but to be honest, the site has been on life support for a good while now, and surprisingly enough, I don't see much push of the transgender ideology on there, but I think it's because most artists have moved away from DeviantArt to other places like Twitter and Blue Sky. But for the most part, while I'm open about my gender critical views in the online art space, I mostly just keep to myself and tread carefully when interacting with other artists within these spaces. But I digress. Boy, do I just miss the online art fandom of the 2000s with how things used to be and connecting with fellow artists on MSN Messenger. Those were such fun and simpler times. And yeah, I'm aware that not all artists support trans ideology, and I'm sure that there are more than I may know. The problem is that it's hard to find them because I understand that most of them will not be open about being gender critical because they know it will very well get them ostracized from their friends and/or art fandom spaces. It's definitely a real thing because when I became more open about being gender critical, I did lose a lot of my art friends, so it's definitely something that can happen. That all being said, I do try to stay optimistic though, and that in time, I might be able to reconnect confidently with fellow artists again, hopefully in the near future. As far as the lesbian, gay, and bisexual scene goes, I've already made a video where I went over how difficult it has been trying to date as a feminine presenting gay man, especially one who doesn't believe in trans ideology, and I admitted that it does feel pretty improbable to almost borderline impossible to date or have a relationship in my position. But it also has been a bit of a struggle trying to interact within the gay community in general, as a lot of the LGB, mainly gay men and bisexuals, have bought into and parrot trans ideology. Especially other feminine gay men, whether they endorse the ideology itself, or they have bought into the delusion themselves into thinking that they are quote-unquote trans or quote-unquote non-binary. I've had a lot of gay and bisexual men be really baffled with how a feminine, gender non-conforming man like myself be not supportive of trans ideology, when in all honesty, it shouldn't be a surprise why a feminine presenting gay man like myself, and even butch lesbians, would not be supportive of the trans ideology. Because we are men and women who don't conform to gender-based stereotypes, and we are living examples that gender norms are not some innate thing that is predetermined by your sex class. But honestly, just overall, most if not all online gay spaces blindly support trans and gender ideology. As I explained earlier in the video, I eventually got permabanned off of Reddit in 2023, and it happened because I got into a debate with a guy on the r/AskGayBros subreddit, where my stance was that there was no such thing as a trans woman or a trans man, that gay men are not attracted to masculinized women, and that being a woman is not a costume, concept, nor an idea in a man's head. The guy kept resorting to circular arguments and refused to answer the question of what is a woman, and to define what a woman was without using superficial gender-based stereotypes or circular definition. He was pretty much using every excuse in the trans rights activist handbook, and he simply couldn't handle my not falling for it. And as soon as I knew it, I was permanently banned off of Reddit altogether, with the reason being that I was being quote-unquote transphobic. And keep in mind that during the debate, and even at the times I did vocally not support the trans ideology in that sub or really any other gay subreddit, I never used any slurs, and I was simply just criticizing the ideology itself. I know that it's just Reddit and that it was never really a perfect site, but I've gotta be honest in saying that I socialized quite a lot on there over the years, And it does suck to not be able to interact and have conversations on there anymore, because I was able to meet all kinds of people and especially talk and converse with other LGB affiliated people about all kinds of things. It was honestly a pretty nice hangout spot, and it really bums me out that I can no longer do that anymore. Aside from when that happened, in more recent years, I'm grateful for the few lesbians and gays who have spoken out publicly against the trans ideology. Magdalene Burns was one of the first, and she really was a force to be reckoned with, but in recent times, there have been people like Mr. Menno, Runaway Siren, Radical Ramblings, GNC Centric, and Jack Joel to name a few. There really aren't a lot of us who do this, but I still really appreciate them all nonetheless, and I applaud their bravery. Overall though, I'm not really active on online gay spaces, since most of the active gay spaces were on Reddit. And on Facebook, most of the LGB groups have also fallen the trans ideology altogether as well, so I frankly find it pointless to even bother, at least at this time anyway. And as far as real life goes, most LGB affiliated people that I have met are also blind supporters of trans ideology, which has made me steer away from even bothering to try going to gay social events. I've only ever met one person, a young lesbian, who was a temp worker at my job, who did not support trans ideology, and we bonded over that when I admitted to her that I just didn't believe in trans ideology, to which she then confessed to me that she felt that she was missing out on trying to date as a young lesbian because all the lesbian apps have been completely overrun with trans-identified men claiming to be lesbians, and that she even had some who would harass her for turning them down. I really sympathized for her, and I tried to offer some advice and support, and honestly, it was just nice being able to talk about this stuff with a fellow homosexual who also did not buy into the trans ideology. But aside from her, every other lesbian, gay, and especially bisexual person that I've met in real life have been proponents of trans ideology, and I just don't have the patience to deal with that. Overall, I gotta admit that it's been a pretty rough time not being able to socialize in the online communities that I used to partake and found comfort in. I still interact here and there, but it's just nothing like how it used to be. I am staunchly firm in my stance against trans and gender ideology, and frankly, there is just no going back. I cannot go back to pretending that trans is a thing when I know that it is not and never was, and that the concept of trans is nothing more than a misogynistic, homophobic, and child abusive ideology that spreads harm to all kinds of vulnerable people in our society. In the meantime though, I just carry on with my own hobbies like drawing, gaming, listening to music, and socializing here and there when I can to continue carrying on with my own life because that's really all that I can do, right? I just try to stay optimistic and hopeful that eventually things will go back to normal in due time. If you're a gay, lesbian, or bisexual person and or a fellow goth or alternative person who watched this video and you don't support the trans ideology as well, I hope that this video has helped you in some way. Just know that you aren't alone and that this trans stuff will not last forever. So please just keep your spirits up and continue pushing back because you've got this, we've got this. Anyway, that's the end of the video. Thanks again for watching to the end if you did, and yeah, until then, I will see you in the next one. Take care, guys. Bye!